$1, Dad. That's all you're worth now." Those words sliced deeper than any knife. Imagine raising a child, sacrificing your best years, only to be dismissed with a gesture that cheap, that cruel. Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. It can sit across your own dinner table, smiling as it tears the ground from under you. What happens when loyalty is traded for greed? When respect is replaced with humiliation? This is not just a story of loss, but of the quiet fire that rises when dignity is tested to its breaking point. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. The snow in Bend had fallen softly all afternoon, layering the pine branches outside my cabin with a white glow. Golden Christmas lights I had strung along the porch shimmered against the reflection of the Deschutes River that wound quietly past my backyard. This was the house Linda May and I had built our lives in, every beam and nail a reminder of decades together. Now, it was only me, a 70-year-old widower with more memories than visitors. I had cooked all day, laying out the turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and pies, just as my wife used to. I hoped, foolishly perhaps, that my son Jordan would notice the effort and remember the values we had raised him on. The air carried the smell of roasted sage and wood smoke as headlights swept into the driveway. Jordan stepped out first, tall and broad-shouldered, still carrying the energy of a salesman even though the confidence in his eyes felt thinner than I remembered. Kayla, his wife, followed close behind in a sequined sweater, already filming on her phone. Her father, Peter Roth, emerged from the passenger seat in Italian shoes that looked absurd against the snow. He had the slick posture of a man who knew how to own a room before even opening his mouth. I shook his hand anyway, out of courtesy, though the cologne he wore stung my nose. Inside, my house felt suddenly smaller as their voices filled it. Kayla fussed with her phone, positioning herself to catch the best angles of the living room I had decorated with simple garlands. Peter leaned back in my chair like it belonged to him. Already talking about housing markets and liquidity, I poured cider into mugs and tried to anchor myself in patience. Then Jordan called everyone outside. I followed slowly, wiping my hands on a rag, and saw a tarp in the driveway. With a dramatic tug, he revealed a gleaming black BMW X5, the kind of machine that made neighbors peek through their curtains. A giant red bow sat on the hood like a crown. Peter laughed, genuinely thrilled, and clapped Jordan on the back. Kayla squealed into her phone as she captured every moment. "For you, Dad," Jordan said to Peter, his voice booming with pride. "A gift for the man who taught me that investing in family is investing in the future." I stood on the porch, hands resting on the railing, the cold seeping through my coat. My son had never spoken of me in such glowing terms. The applause and laughter stung more than the wind biting my ears. Back inside, while Peter admired the German leather seats and a photo Kayla kept replaying, Jordan pressed an envelope into my hand. "And for you, Dad," he said lightly. Inside was a single $1 gift card from a gas station down the street. "It's symbolic. You always taught me thrift. Figured this was perfect." Perfect. That word cut like a blade. I remembered working double shifts to pay for his tuition, co-signing the loan for his first house, giving him the money for his wedding reception. Decades of sacrifice, reduced to a gesture dressed up as meaning. I forced a smile, thanked him, and set the card quietly beside Linda May's photo on the mantel. She looked back at me with the calm patience she had worn all her life. Dinner carried on with talk of portfolios and cash flow freedom. Peter raised his glass to new opportunities, and Kayla showed off photos from a networking event. I ate in silence, chewing slowly, tasting little. My turkey was tender, the potatoes buttery, but no one remarked on them. The fireplace cracked loudly, the only acknowledgement that I existed at all. As the evening wore down, I caught Jordan's eyes once, searching for a flicker of recognition, of gratitude. Instead, he looked away toward Peter, as if waiting for approval. My son had given his father-in-law a throne and left me a token coin. When the dishes were cleared and the guests bundled up, I remained by the fire. The BMW outside gleamed like an idol under the porch lights. On the mantel, the single-dollar card glowed faintly beneath the lamp, a symbol of my place in this new family order. Somewhere deep inside, something shifted. I did not rage or slam a door. I simply felt the fracture settling in, the quiet knowledge that I had been replaced. I sat there long after the taillights disappeared down the snowy road, listening to the crack of wood and the faint rush of the river. I told myself that maybe tomorrow I would feel different, but as the flames burned low, I knew the truth. Christmas had marked more than another year. It had marked the moment my son chose another man as his father, leaving me with $1 and a silence that would grow heavier with every passing day. If you're still watching and felt the sting of that first betrayal, comment number 1 below so I know you're with me. Now let's move into chapter 2, where the cracks begin to widen. The morning after Christmas was quiet, almost too quiet. Snow had settled overnight, softening the edges of my yard and muffling the sound of the highway beyond the trees. I shuffled into the kitchen, the smell of roasted turkey still clinging faintly to the air. Plates from the feast sat stacked by the sink, reminding me of the hours I had spent cooking for people who hardly noticed. The BMW gleamed across the street in Peter Roth's driveway, its red bow sagging slightly in the frost. The contrast between that extravagant display and the single-dollar card on my mantel gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the memory of Jordan's strange request the night before. Right after dinner, he had pulled me aside, his voice low and urgent, asking for the key to the storage shed. He claimed Kayla had left a gift box there, though I knew she hadn't stepped foot inside. His hands trembled slightly as he took the key, and when he returned, he was empty-handed, mumbling something about, "Must have been left in the car." It wasn't like Jordan to look so nervous, and the detail kept circling in my mind like a loose screw rattling in a dryer. The unease deepened when I checked the mail. Among the usual holiday cards was an envelope from the HOA. I tore it open and frowned. A citation. A fine for improper parking on my driveway. It accused me of blocking access, though I hadn't parked outside at all. My truck was in the garage, as it always was. I reread the letter twice, baffled, until I remembered Peter had recently been elected to the HOA board. A coincidence? My gut told me no. The phone rang mid-morning. It was the bank. A polite young man explained that someone had attempted to update the phone number on my savings account. They needed to verify if I had authorized the change. My stomach dropped. "No," I said firmly. I hadn't made any changes. He assured me the update had been denied, but the fact that someone had even tried shook me. The caller suggested I set up extra security measures. As I hung up, my hands trembled. This wasn't just sloppiness. Someone was probing. Later that afternoon, Peter called, his voice smooth as ever. He suggested meeting for coffee to talk about property opportunities. He mentioned casually how much riverside homes like mine were worth these days, how aging owners could benefit from streamlining assets. The way he lingered on the word aging made my skin crawl. I told him I'd think about it, though in truth, I already knew I wanted nothing to do with his schemes. I remembered Kayla's remark at dinner, spoken with a laugh but edged with meaning. "Maybe we can help your dad with his asset management." These things can get so complicated. At the time I had smiled politely, but the more I thought about it, the more her words sounded like a warning disguised as kindness. As the day wore on, the air in the house felt heavier. I watched Jordan's face in my mind's eye, the way he avoided my gaze whenever money or property came up. He had always been ambitious, but lately there was a desperation in him I hadn't seen before. It was as though he had hitched his wagon entirely to Peter's approval, leaving me to stand alone in the cold. I needed advice. I dialed Nora Delgado, an old friend from my electrician days, now a lawyer who had handled estate matters for half the county. Her voice was brisk but warm. I told her everything. Jordan's odd request with the shed, the HOA fine, the bank's call, Peter's invitation. She listened carefully, then said, "Evan, that's no coincidence. Keep every letter, every receipt. Make copies of your documents. And for God's sake, don't sign anything, not even a postcard." That night, I pulled out the wooden box where I kept the title to the house, Linda May's insurance papers, and our savings bonds. I scanned each page on my old printer and stored them on a USB drive I slipped into my pocket. The work steadied me, gave me back a little control. Before heading to bed, I stepped onto the porch. The snow reflected the moonlight, glowing silver. That's when I caught sight of Jordan standing near the edge of the yard, bundled in his coat, phone pressed close to his mouth. His breath steamed in the cold as he whispered, "Yeah, swap the SIM. Tomorrow we choke it off." I froze in the shadows, my pulse hammering. He pocketed the phone and hurried back toward his car, not realizing I had seen him. Inside, I slid the bolt on the door and returned to my desk. I placed the $1 card beneath the desk lamp, letting its pale light remind me of the truth I could no longer deny. The gift hadn't just been thoughtless, it had been a signal. My son had chosen his path, and I needed to prepare for what was coming. Trouble wasn't approaching, it was already under my roof. If you're still watching and sensing that uneasy tension growing, comment number 2 to let me know you're following. Now let's move into Chapter 3, where the first blow lands. The days after Christmas carried a strange stillness. The snow still blanketed Bend in its usual postcard beauty, the river slid past my backyard in silence, and the cabin groaned in the cold as though it too was uneasy. I tried to return to my routines, tightening hinges on a kitchen cabinet, sanding a piece of pine wood in the shed, taking a long walk along the icy river trail, but none of it erased the image of my son whispering into his phone or the call from the bank. My instincts, sharpened by decades of problem-solving as an electrician, told me these weren't coincidences. They were warnings. 3 days after Christmas, a knock came at my door. It was still early, the kind of blue morning when the sun hasn't quite decided to rise. I opened it to find Jordan, Kayla, and Peter standing there like a trio of salesmen ready to make a pitch. Kayla's hands clutched a box of pastries from the most expensive bakery in town, her smile wide but brittle. Jordan shifted on his feet, his jaw tight. Peter, as always, looked perfectly composed, a wool coat draped around him like a mantle. "Surprise visit, Dad," Jordan said, forcing cheer. "Thought we'd bring breakfast." I stepped aside, letting them in. The smell of butter and sugar filled the kitchen as Kayla unpacked the pastries onto my table, speaking too loudly about how wonderful the holidays had been. Peter accepted the coffee I brewed with a nod, his eyes already scanning the house as though appraising it. It didn't take long for him to steer the conversation. "Evan," he began smoothly, "I've been thinking about you. A man in your position should be proactive. Estate planning isn't about today, it's about tomorrow. We want to help you avoid complications down the road." I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the cream swirl. "I manage fine on my own," I said evenly. Peter chuckled as though I'd made a joke. "Of course. But efficiency matters. If Jordan had joint authority on your accounts, you'd never have to worry. One signature, seamless transitions. Families do this all the time." I looked at my son. His eyes darted away, landing on the pastry box. Kayla's smile stretched too wide, her head nodding in rehearsed agreement. It was like watching a poorly staged play. Peter reached into his leather briefcase and laid a folder on the table. "Just some information packets," he said casually. I flipped through the glossy covers, charts about retirement, notes about asset leverage, and tucked among them a draft power of attorney form. Jordan's name was printed neatly on the line designated for agent. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face calm. "That's a lot to take in," I said, closing the folder. "I'll look it over when I have time." Peter leaned back, his smile polite but thin. "Timing is important in these matters, Evan. You don't want opportunities to slip by." "I'll think about it," I repeated. The tension was a physical thing, pressing against the walls of my small kitchen. Jordan forced another smile, Kayla made a bright comment about the snow, and Peter gathered his papers. They rose to leave, each masking irritation under a thin veil of politeness. At the door, Kayla fumbled with her gloves. Something slipped from her purse and fluttered to the floor. She didn't notice as they stepped into the cold. I bent down after closing the door and picked it up, a receipt from a law office downtown. My son's name was scribbled in the notes section. The description read, "Property appraisal consultation, December 12." The room swayed slightly as I read the date again. 2 weeks before Christmas, before the BM, before the pastries, before the $1 insult. My son and his father-in-law had already been making plans about my property, not theirs. I sat heavily at the table, the receipt trembling in my hand. My suspicions were no longer shadows. They were facts printed in black ink. The pastries on the table smelled suddenly sour, the sugar cloying in my throat. I folded the receipt carefully and slid it into the wooden box where I kept Linda May's papers. My hands shook, not from age but from rage. They weren't circling anymore, they were moving in. The first blow had landed, and I knew the fight for my home, for my independence, had officially begun. If you're still watching and feel the shock of those hidden papers, drop a number 3 in the comments so I know you caught it. Now, let's move into chapter 4, where things spiral even deeper. The morning after I found the receipt, I woke before dawn with a fire in my chest. For days I had been playing the part of the polite father, nodding through conversations while Peter smirked across my table and my son avoided my eyes. That ended now. I brewed coffee strong enough to sting and spread my documents across the kitchen table. Every title, insurance paper, and bond lined neatly in rows. Linda May's handwriting was still on some of the envelopes, looping and graceful, a reminder of what I was fighting for. I whispered to myself, almost like a vow, I won't let them take this. Not my house, not my life. By mid-morning, I was at the courthouse. The building's marble lobby smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant, the air too cold for comfort. At the records office, a clerk named Ms. Hardy searched my file with a few keystrokes. She frowned, then turned the monitor slightly toward me. "There's a preliminary appraisal request on your property," she said. "Filed December 12th. Authorized by Jordan Miller." My stomach clenched. Authorized? How could he order that without me? She shrugged. "If someone claims to act on your behalf, sometimes paperwork goes through until it's challenged." I thanked her and walked out, my boots echoing down the polished hall. The trap wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was written into the county's files, a ghost hand drawing plans over my future. I called Jordan that afternoon and asked him to meet me at Benny's Diner, a place we'd gone to since he was a teenager. I wanted neutral ground, somewhere public. He arrived in a pressed shirt, hair slicked back like Peter's, a faint smell of cologne that wasn't his usual. I watched him slide into the booth across from me, his eyes darting nervously toward the menu, though he knew it by heart. When the waitress poured our coffee, I leaned forward. "Jordan, I was at the courthouse this morning. They showed me the appraisal on my house. You filed it." His jaw tensed. "Dad, it's nothing shady. It's just future planning. Peter said, I cut in, and you obeyed?" "Oh?" He bristled, then softened his tone. "Dad, listen. It's for your protection. Estate planning isn't about now, it's about later. If something happens to you, we'd avoid probate, avoid fights. It's efficient." I stirred my coffee slowly, letting the silence stretch. I'm not ready to hand over my life while I'm still living it. For a moment, his eyes burned with something close to anger. Then he forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You're making it harder than it has to be. We just want to make things easier." I set my cup down firmly. Easier for who? The words hung between us. He glanced at his watch, muttered something about work, and left money for his coffee on the table. As I watched him walk out, my heart twisted. He had always been impulsive, but this was different. This was desperation wrapped in obedience to a man who had no right to meddle in my family. On the drive home, a black SUV pulled out behind me, its tinted windows impossible to read. It stayed on my bumper for 5 blocks, then turned off suddenly at an intersection. My pulse hammered. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe Peter wanted to remind me I was being watched. Either way, it told me the game was escalating. Back at the cabin, I called Nora Delgado. Her voice was steady as ever. I explained the courthouse discovery, the diner conversation, The SUV, she sighed. Evan, this is moving faster than I thought. Start keeping a record of everything. Dates, times, what was said. Build a paper trail. If this turns into a fight, you'll need proof. After we hung up, I sat by the fire, journal open on my lap. I wrote down every detail, the receipt, the appraisal, the diner exchange, even the color of the SUV. My handwriting shook, not from weakness, but from the force of trying to keep everything straight. Later, I pulled out an old photo album. There was Jordan at 10, holding a baseball glove bigger than his head. At 18, in his graduation gown, smiling as though the world was his. At 25, standing at the altar with Kayla, my arm around him, pride swelling in my chest. I pressed my palm against the photo, my throat tight. I wanted to believe that boy was still in there somewhere. But when I glanced at the mantle, the $1 gift card sat under the lamp, its cheap plastic glinting back at me. That was the truth now. My son had chosen his loyalty, and I had to choose mine. That night, before turning in, I closed the journal and wrote one last line. They think I'm weak. They'll find out soon enough. If you're still here and can see how every effort ends in failure, type number 4 so I know you're still with me. Now, let's step into chapter 5, where the real storm breaks. The invitation arrived by text, short and sweet. Dinner tomorrow, Dad. Let's talk things over. Jordan's words sounded conciliatory, but the memory of his nervous glances at the diner told me otherwise. I almost declined, but some part of me knew I needed to face them head on. I had spent weeks biting my tongue, and if the trap was waiting, better to see it in daylight than in shadows. Their home in West Bend was as polished as a showroom. Lights gleamed on surfaces no one touched, rugs too pristine to walk on without hesitation. The moment I stepped inside, I felt like an outsider visiting a stage set rather than my son's home. Kayla greeted me with a bright smile that didn't touch her eyes. She ushered me in with the aroma of roast beef and wine, her manicured hands fluttering like a hostess trying too hard. Peter sat in Jordan's chair at the head of the table, lounging as if it had always been his. He rose briefly to shake my hand, his grip cool and confident, before reclaiming his spot. Jordan brought out plates, speaking too quickly, almost tripping over his words in his attempt at cheer. The meal was good, but it felt hollow, every bite laced with tension. Conversation began with Kayla talking about the children of her colleagues, about vacations they planned, about how smart families prepare for the future. Jordan nodded along like a student repeating lessons. Peter chimed in with stories of clients who had streamlined their estates and avoided messy complications. I chewed slowly, letting them play out their script, my face a mask of patience. After dessert, Jordan excused himself and returned with a folder. He set it carefully on the table in front of me, sliding it across like a dealer presenting cards. Dad, these are just some routine estate forms. Nothing complicated, just signatures to keep things safe. I opened the folder and scanned the top page. My name was there, along with words I had dreaded. Durable power of attorney. Jordan's name was listed neatly in the agent box, granting him control over everything I owned. My hands tightened around the paper until the edges bent. I looked up slowly, meeting his eyes. Do you know what this is, son? Jordan swallowed. It's just paperwork. Peter says it'll help everyone. Easier, safer. I slammed the folder shut, the crack echoing through the dining room. The cheer drained out of the room like water from a punctured pipe. You're trying to steal my life while I'm still living it, I said, my voice steady but sharp enough to cut. Jordan's face twisted, shame and anger battling for dominance. You don't understand, Dad. We're drowning. We took out a second mortgage. Kayla lost her job months ago. We're behind on everything. Peter said, his voice cracked. Peter said this would fix it, that it was the only way. Peter leaned forward, voice smooth as oil. Evan, this isn't theft. It's planning. You're being paranoid. Do you want your son's family to collapse under debt when a simple signature could save them? I reached into my coat and pulled out the folded receipt, sliding it across the table. Appraisal consultation. December 12th. Jordan Miller. I know you've already started carving up my house, and the courthouse clerk showed me the record. You thought I wouldn't notice. Jordan's eyes widened. Kayla's smile fell completely. And there's more, I continued. The bank called me about an attempted security change. I know about the SUV following me, and I recorded everything at the diner. For the first time, Peter's mask cracked. His smile vanished, replaced by raw contempt. You old fool. You think you're clever? You're a liability, Evan, clinging to a house you can't maintain, money you'll never use. You should be grateful your son's willing to take responsibility for you. The words hit Jordan like a slap. He looked between us, realization dawning at the cruelty behind Peter's charm. Kayla sat frozen, staring at her hands. I stood slowly, the folder still closed in front of me. You gave me $1 for Christmas, Jordan. $1. And now you ask me to hand you my life. I won't. Not today. Not ever. Jordan's lips parted, but no words came. Peter glared, his control slipping. The performance was over. The masks had fallen. I walked to the door, pulling on my coat. My voice carried back into the stunned silence. You tried to replace me with $1. Before this is over, you'll learn the price of that insult. The night air was sharp as I stepped outside. Behind me, their house glowed warm but hollow, its walls echoing with betrayal. Ahead of me, the fight had just begun. I drove home from Jordan's house with my hands clenched around the steering wheel, knuckles white. The folder, the power of attorney papers, Peter's sneer, every word replayed in my mind, striking me like blows I couldn't block. I parked outside my cabin and sat there in the dark for a long time, the cold seeping through the windows. When I finally stepped inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and pine, familiar comforts that now felt fragile. I poured a glass of water and stared at the $1 card on my mantle, the cheap plastic catching the glow of the lamp. That was the measure of my worth to my son, and yet some part of me still wanted to save him. I lit the fire and lowered myself into Linda May's old rocker. The flames cracked and hissed, their rhythm pulling me into thought. My instincts screamed at me to strike back hard, to go straight to the police with the receipt, the recordings, the bank alerts. But another part of me, the father who remembered Jordan's first baseball game, who remembered holding him after nightmares, wanted to believe this wasn't entirely his doing. Maybe Peter had wound him too tight, maybe desperation had twisted him. Either way, I couldn't stay still. I picked up the phone and dialed Nora. She answered on the second ring, her tone steady but sharp. I told her everything. The dinner invitation, the folder of documents, Peter's outburst, Jordan's desperation spilling out like a confession. There was a long pause on the line before she spoke. Evan, you already have enough. The receipt from the law office, the bank's alert, the attempted appraisal, this isn't suspicion anymore. It's fraud, plain and simple. You need to take this to the sheriff. The longer you wait, the more dangerous it gets, I rubbed my forehead. And what happens to Jordan? What happens when they see his name on every page? Then maybe he faces consequences, Nora said. But that's better than letting Peter destroy you both. Her words stung because they were true. But when we hung up, my heart was still torn. I wasn't ready to see my son in handcuffs, not yet. I told myself I was buying time, but in truth, I was clinging to a sliver of hope that I could save him from drowning without letting him pull me under too. The next morning, a letter arrived from the county office. I tore it open with stiff fingers. Inside was confirmation that a power of attorney document had been filed, bearing my name, my signature, except it wasn't mine. The strokes were close, practiced, but I could see the differences instantly. My knees weakened, and I had to grip the table to steady myself. With that piece of paper, they could sell my house, drain my accounts, and leave me with nothing. I sank into a chair, the letter trembling in my hands. For a moment, despair crushed me. I thought of Linda May's careful handwriting on the old insurance forms, her voice urging me to stay cautious, to protect what we built. My throat tightened as I realized how close I was to losing all of it. Then the phone rang. The caller ID was blocked. I answered cautiously. A low, distorted voice spoke. "Sign the papers quietly, Mr. Miller. If you fight, your utilities will vanish, your accounts will bleed red, and you'll find debts you never knew you owed." The line went dead before I could reply. I sat frozen, the silence of the cabin pressing in on me. My gut churned. It wasn't just family scheming anymore. This was intimidation. Peter's reach spread further than I imagined, into hands willing to threaten and destroy. That was the breaking point. Rage burned away my hesitation, leaving clarity in its place. I couldn't save Jordan by yielding. I couldn't protect Linda May's memory by staying passive. I had to fight, not blindly, but smart. That night, I pulled out my journal and wrote down everything. The dinner, the forged document, the anonymous call. My handwriting steadied as my resolve hardened. I copied files onto a USB drive and tucked it into a hidden compartment in the shed, where no one but me would think to look. Then I closed the journal with a decisive snap. I looked again at the dollar card on the mantle. For the first time, I didn't feel only hurt when I saw it. I felt determination. That insult had given me clarity. "I may lose my son," I whispered to the fire, "but I won't lose myself. Tomorrow, I start turning the tables." If you're still watching and can feel the weight of that impossible choice, comment number 5 below to let me know you're hooked. Now let's move into Chapter 7, where consequences strike hard. I woke before sunrise, the cold light barely slipping through the curtains. The cabin was silent except for the hum of the old refrigerator, but my mind buzzed with the memory of that distorted voice. "Sign the papers quietly, or everything falls apart." My first act was to check my accounts, hands trembling as I typed passwords. To my relief, the balances hadn't changed. The utilities were still active, but I knew it was only a matter of time. Threats like that don't vanish. They wait, like wolves circling. By mid-morning, the crunch of tires on snow announced a visitor. I stepped onto the porch, bracing against the icy air, and saw Jordan climbing out of his car. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, dark crescents under his eyes, shoulders sagging. He didn't meet my gaze as he walked up the steps. "Dad," he muttered, "we need to talk." Inside, he paced like a man trapped in his own skin. Bills are stacked on the counter at home. The second mortgage payment's late. Kayla's panicking. Peter says if you just sign, all of this pressure goes away. Please, Dad, just sign. End this. His voice cracked on the last word, desperation bleeding through. For a moment, the father in me wanted to gather him up, like when he was a boy. But then I remembered the letter from the county, the forged signature, the humiliation of that single dollar card. I shook my head slowly. "I won't trade my life to fix your mistakes, son. I won't give away everything your mother and I built because you're in over your head." His face twisted between anger and shame. "You don't understand. This isn't just about me, it's about my family. The kids need a father who doesn't sell his soul," I cut in. For a long moment, silence hung between us, thick and suffocating. He finally dropped into a chair, staring at his hands like they might hold an answer. Then, without another word, he stood and left, the slam of the door rattling the windows. That evening, my phone buzzed with an alert from the bank. My credit card had been maxed out with charges I didn't make. Luxury goods in Portland, hotels I'd never visited, identity theft. My chest tightened. Peter wasn't bluffing. He was pulling strings already, fabricating ruin to corner me. I called the fraud department and filed a report, but I knew how slow the system worked. Peter had momentum, and I was always reacting. After I hung up, I paced the cabin until midnight, unable to sit, my thoughts a storm. I saw Linda May's smile in every shadow, heard her voice warning me not to trust appearances. By 2 a.m., I sank into the armchair, exhausted but too restless to sleep. At dawn, my phone buzzed again. This time, a message from Jordan. I didn't know it would go this far. "Please, Dad, don't hate me." I read it over and over, anger and grief twisting together. His words confirmed what I already feared. He had opened the door for Peter and now couldn't close it. He was trapped, and in dragging me into his desperation, he had betrayed me more deeply than he realized. By mid-morning, Nora called. Her voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. "Evan, I did some digging. Your house has already been listed in a quiet sale inquiry through a shell company. It's not public yet, but if this moves forward, the property could change hands on paper before you even know it. Once that happens, untangling it will be hell." My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles burned. "You're telling me they've already put my house on the market?" "Not openly," she said, "but the paperwork is in motion. You need to act now, Evan. No more waiting." I stared out the window at the river, frozen in patches, the current sluggish under sheets of ice. This land, this cabin, it was my life, my history with Linda May, my sweat built into every beam. And now it was slipping away because my son couldn't see through the charm of a manipulator. I lowered the phone and pressed it to my chest, the weight of betrayal crushing me. My hesitation had cost me dearly. I had thought I could save Jordan by stalling, but all I'd done was give Peter more time to sink his claws deeper. But as I stood there, staring at the land I refused to lose, something in me hardened. Enough. I would not bend. Not to Peter's threats, not to forged papers, not even to my son's pleading. The consequences had come, yes, but they had also clarified one thing. The fight was no longer optional. It was survival. The night after Nora's call, sleep was little more than a rumor. I tossed beneath the quilt, my mind replaying every threat, every forged document, every look of shame on Jordan's face. Around 3 a.m., I gave up and sat by the fire with my journal. The pages were thick with notes now, dates, receipts, phone calls, even descriptions of Peter's smug expression at dinner. Somewhere between exhaustion and fury, a strange calm settled over me. I realized I had been reacting too long. If I wanted to win, I had to stop being the prey. At sunrise, I packed a folder with my notes and drove into town. Nora's office sat in an old brick building above a bakery, the smell of bread wafting up the stairs. She greeted me with tired eyes but a steady grip on my shoulder. I laid everything on her desk, the forged signature letter, the appraisal notice, the bank fraud alerts. She skimmed each page with growing concern, her brow furrowing deeper. "Evan," she said quietly, "you're in the middle of something bigger than your son's mistakes. Peter's not just opportunistic, he's running a coordinated scheme. If you confront him the wrong way, he'll bury you in legal tangles before the sheriff even takes your call." "So, what do I do?" I asked. She leaned back, steepling her fingers. "We need evidence. Not suspicion, not fragments, ironclad proof. If he's brazen enough, he'll hang himself with his own words, but you have to give him the rope." Her idea was bold. Agree to another meeting about investment planning, let Peter talk, and record every word. The thought of inviting the wolf to my door made my stomach twist, but I saw the wisdom in it. "So I play along," I murmured, "while he thinks I'm caving." "Exactly," she said. "But you'll need Jordan. If Peter senses a trap, he'll clam up. But if Jordan brings you in, Peter will think you're finally folding." The drive home felt heavier than the morning fog. I wrestled with the idea of involving my son. Could I trust him? He had already betrayed me, already let Peter dig hooks into his pride and his wallet. But he was also the boy who once pressed dandelions into my hand and called them flowers. Maybe he deserved one last chance. That evening, I called him to the cabin. He arrived looking worn, his tie loosened, his voice low. I didn't waste time. I laid the forged power of attorney beside a document Linda May had signed years ago. Side by side, the differences were obvious. "Look at this, Jordan. The Y's don't match. The loops aren't mine. This is fraud, and Peter is dragging you down with it." His eyes flicked between the pages. His hands shook slightly. "Dad, I didn't know it was this bad." Peter said it was just strategy, just... Strategy? My voice rose sharper than I intended. "Son, strategy doesn't mean selling your father's house while he's still breathing. It doesn't mean forging signatures. Peter's using you. You're a pawn, nothing more." He dropped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I can't lose the house, Dad." Kayla's terrified. The kids need a father who stands on his own 2 feet," I cut in, my voice softening but firm. "Not one who hides behind a con man's promises." "You still have a choice, Jordan. Stand with me or keep sinking with him, but you can't have both." He didn't answer. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the fire. At last, he rose and left without a word, leaving the documents on the table between us. That night, as I sat alone, my phone buzzed. A message from Jordan lit the screen. "I'll help you." Just 3 words. Enough to stir hope, enough to stir doubt. Did he mean it? Or was it another ploy to soften me? I set the phone down and opened my journal again. On the fresh page I wrote, "Tomorrow, I stop being the hunted. Tomorrow, the hunter walks into my home." Then I reached into the drawer and pulled out the small recording device I'd bought years ago to capture Linda May's stories. I placed it on the table where it could hear every word. This time, I wasn't just bracing for betrayal. I was preparing for the storm. If you're still with me and sense the tide beginning to turn, type number 6 in the comments so I know you're here. Now let's head into Chapter 9, where the reckoning finally arrives. I spent the morning arranging my cabin as if it were nothing more than a humble kitchen table meeting, but every detail had purpose. The recorder sat on a shelf near the window, disguised beneath a stack of old mail. I tested it twice, listening to the faint playback of my own breathing before hiding it again. I rehearsed in my head how I would sound, uncertain, tempted, but still cautious. The goal was to make Peter believe I was folding while pulling every word I needed from him. Jordan arrived first, shivering, though the air outside was mild. He looked thinner than I remembered, his tie loose, his eyes sunken from lack of sleep. He stepped inside and glanced around nervously. "Kayla doesn't know I'm here," he said quietly. "I told her I was working late, and Peter thinks I'm still on his side." I studied him for a moment, searching for the boy who once carved his initials into the dock with mine. "Then you'd better stay steady, son," I said. "One slip and Peter will know. He'll eat you alive." Jordan swallowed hard but nodded. The crunch of tires on gravel came next. Peter entered without waiting for an invitation, his confidence spilling across the room. He carried a folder under his arm, and his smile was polished enough to pass for charm. But his eyes gave him away, darting, calculating, scanning every corner like a predator sizing up its cage. "Evan," he said warmly, "glad to see you've come to your senses. Smart man. We're here to make life easier, not harder." He settled into a chair, spreading the documents on the table, as if laying out cards for a game he had already won. He launched into small talk about markets, about families who had secured their future, all laced with condescension. I leaned back, feigning hesitation. "So, this investment group," I said slowly, "they're real people. Not just names on paper." "Of course they're real," Peter said, his voice slick. "Exclusive, discreet, the sort of people who don't like publicity. They trust me to bring them the right clients, like you." "And the forged signature?" I asked carefully. "The power of attorney that somehow appeared at the county office with my name on it?" Jordan stiffened. Peter chuckled. "Technicalities. Sometimes paperwork needs a little streamlining. You'll thank me later when everything's tidy." I let the silence stretch, as if I were considering it. "And Jordan," I asked finally, "you told him this was the only way?" Peter grinned, teeth too sharp. "Your son understands what's at stake. He wants his family safe. He knows you're sitting on dead assets. Together, we can free all that potential, liquidate what you don't need, funnel it into growth. Everybody wins." The recorder captured every word. I could almost hear the click of his arrogance fastening the noose around his own neck. I leaned forward, fixing him with a steady gaze. And what if I told you this conversation is being recorded? That every lie, every admission, every forgery you've just confessed to is already copied and sent to someone who knows exactly what to do with it? For the first time, Peter's smile faltered. His eyes darted to Jordan, then back to me. You wouldn't dare! Jordan straightened in his chair. His voice shook, but it held. He would. And I'm done covering for you, Peter. This ends now. Peter slammed his fist on the table. You stupid boy! Without me, you'll drown in debt. You'll lose everything. Better that, Jordan said quietly, than losing my father. The room went still. Peter's bluster drained into fury, but there was nowhere left for him to strike. He gathered the papers with trembling hands, his veneer of control shattered. You think this is over? He spat, rising from his chair. No, I said calmly, standing too. This is just beginning, for you. The sheriff will want to hear everything, and Nora already has the proof. For a heartbeat, he looked like he might lunge, but instead he stormed out, the slam of the door shaking the walls. His tires screeched down the road, leaving silence in his wake. I exhaled slowly, the weight of months finally shifting off my chest. Jordan stood frozen, staring at the door as if expecting Peter to burst back in. I put a hand on his shoulder. It's over, son. At least the worst of it, I picked up the phone and dialed Nora. We've got him, I said simply. Her reply came steady, reassuring. That's all we needed, Evan. The evidence is airtight. He can't run from this. As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't known in months. Victory. Not just survival, but the knowledge that for once I wasn't the hunted. I had turned the tables, and Peter was the one running. The days after Peter's collapse passed in a strange quiet. For months, my life had been noise, threats, arguments, the rustle of forged documents on the table. Now the cabin felt like it had exhaled, the silence settling in the rafters like dust. I spent mornings on the porch with coffee, the river crawling beneath patches of thawing ice, and for the first time in a long while, my heartbeat matched the rhythm of the water instead of racing against it. Nora called on a Tuesday. Her voice carried the calm weight of justice. Evan, it's done. Peter was taken into custody this morning. Fraud, forgery, attempted elder exploitation. The DA has everything. Your recording sealed it. He won't be walking away from this. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the woods. Relief came in slow waves, not triumphant, but steady. Vindication doesn't erase scars, but it steadies the ground beneath your feet. I thanked her, my voice rough, and she told me the DA would be in touch about testifying. When the call ended, I leaned back in the chair and let the news soak into my bones. 2 days later, Jordan came. He didn't barrel in like before. He lingered at the edge of the porch as if unsure he still had the right. Kayla followed, quieter than usual, her eyes downcast. Jordan finally climbed the steps, his shoulders bent beneath shame. Dad, he began, voice breaking. I was wrong. About everything. I let my fear drive me, and I dragged you into the mud with me. I don't know how to ask for forgiveness, but I need you to know. I see it now. I see what I almost let happen. I studied him for a long moment. His face carried lines he hadn't earned, the toll of debts and desperation. Kayla stepped forward, her voice soft. We're going to fix this. I'll work, he'll work, whatever it takes. We won't let what Peter started define us. I nodded slowly. You'll have to. But understand something, son. Trust isn't a gift. It's not handed out once and kept forever. It's earned. And you'll have to earn mine again, piece by piece. Jordan's eyes filled, but he nodded. I will, Dad. I promise. That night, after they left, I stood in front of the mantel. The cheap $1 card still sat there, mocking me. For weeks, it had been a wound I couldn't stop touching, a symbol of betrayal I couldn't shake. But tonight, it looked different. It wasn't just an insult anymore. It was proof of what I'd survived. I picked it up, slipped it into a drawer, and closed it away. Then I set a framed photograph of Linda May in its place. Her smile lit the room better than the fire ever could. Later, I opened my journal. The pages were thick with evidence and pain, but tonight I wrote something different. Wealth is not in houses or cars. It's in the courage to stand firm, even when betrayed by your own blood. Dignity is the only inheritance no one can steal. The cabin felt warmer as I wrote, as if Linda May herself had leaned close. I thought about how she would have handled this storm, quietly, firmly, with that unyielding kindness she wore like armor. I hoped she'd be proud of me for standing my ground, for refusing to let betrayal write the ending of my story. As the sun bled out across the river, I stepped onto the porch again. The sky burned orange, the trees black against the glow. The air was crisp, alive, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. I whispered softly, almost as if to her, "They thought they could measure my worth with $1, but what remains cannot be stolen." The words hung in the air, not bitter, not triumphant, simply true. I closed my eyes and let them settle into me, a lesson carved into bone. Life would go on. Jordan would stumble as he tried to rebuild, Kayla would shoulder more than her share, and I would carry my memories of Linda May like a lantern. The future wasn't smooth, but it was mine, unclaimed by forged papers or empty promises. And that, I realized, was the truest wealth of all. Life has a way of testing the boundaries of what we believe we can endure. Sometimes those trials come not from strangers or distant forces, but from the very places we thought were safest, from the hands we once trusted, from the voices we once relied upon. Betrayal within the family circle cuts deeper than most wounds, because it strikes at the foundation of belonging. Yet in the ashes of that pain lies the possibility of something more enduring than trust itself: resilience. When people face deception, the temptation is to give in to bitterness, to allow anger to harden the heart and close the door on forgiveness forever. And yet, anger alone cannot be a destination. True survival means choosing clarity over rage, dignity over despair. It means realizing that no one can strip away a person's worth unless that person surrenders it. Even when property, finances, or legacy are threatened, the essence of who we are remains rooted in something untouchable: the courage to stand firm in truth. There is a quiet strength in drawing boundaries, in saying enough when others expect compliance. The act of refusal can become an act of liberation. It is in those moments, when we decide that we will no longer be manipulated, that we reclaim the narrative of our lives. The world may measure success in wealth or possessions, but the deeper measure is how one responds when those things are endangered. Do we crumble under the weight of fear, or do we rise with the clarity of knowing that dignity cannot be bought or sold? Adversity reveals character. It exposes the cracks in relationships and illuminates the choices that define who we truly are. When confronted with betrayal, some collapse under shame, while others seize the chance to begin again. The path is rarely smooth, but it is on that uneven ground that strength takes root. Out of pain grows understanding. Out of loss comes the wisdom to recognize what really matters. Family, too, takes on new meaning in these trials. Blood may bind, but choices shape the real bonds that endure. Sometimes those closest to us stumble, seduced by promises that turn to dust. But even in disappointment, there remains a chance for redemption. People can lose their way and still find the road back, though trust will always require careful rebuilding. The lessons of betrayal are harsh, but they also open the possibility for reconciliation, for discovering that love tempered by hardship can be stronger than love untested. At the heart of every struggle is the question of legacy. Not the legacy of money or houses or cars, but the kind that lingers in memory and example. The legacy of refusing to let deceit define us. The legacy of showing courage in the face of manipulation. The legacy of demonstrating that self-respect is a form of wealth greater than any account balance. These are the riches that outlast generations, that carry forward even when material possessions fade. In the end, every hardship becomes a mirror, reflecting not only the cruelty of others, but the choices we make in response. Do we allow betrayal to corrode our spirit, or do we transform it into wisdom that steadies our steps? To endure, to learn, and to rise again is to claim victory that no con or scheme can undo. Life's true treasures are not bound by paper contracts or market value. They are found in the quiet resilience of a steady heart, in the refusal to be defined by what others try to take away, and in the knowledge that one's worth is measured not by gifts received, but by the strength of standing unbroken. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all is this: dignity, once guarded, cannot be stolen. It remains the final inheritance, a wealth that belongs wholly to those who choose to honor it. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.